If you know you're going to have bad thoughts, you should like think of good things to think about instead. And she has like a lot of fears, you know, she's like a 7-year-old girl. So we made like a happy list, and every single time she thinks of something bad, she goes to that happy list. And that was your idea. So thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. That is so nice to hear. That is so nice to hear. You know, I think sometimes, like one of the Lubavitcher Rebbe said, I mean, obviously I'm not comparing, I'm saying, he said that when he talks, it's like a hat maker, that he fashions a hat and he puts it on display and it's going to fit someone's head. So I feel that sometimes when you teach, especially when you teach over Zoom, especially when you're teaching to a bunch of blank screens, that like you're just that hat maker. You're just trusting God that this fits someone's head. Will I ever know whose head? Probably not. So it's nice. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing that. I so appreciate that. So we are putting aside this and we are starting this idea. All right. So what we would like to do today is focus on continuing working through the tools we're using on positivity, and then hopefully get to some bit of intimacy and definitely touch on the Torah portion, the Parsha, where there's so much to talk about, but I know we're just going to pick one thing because we're not going to have time for more. But at least you'll have something to say at the Shabbos table. Now, we have been doing a lot of work on these tools. And the reason why is because I felt if I just like, okay, here's a great idea, here's a great idea, here's a great idea, then like, okay, it's just like washes right over you. And then you don't walk away with anything. And like you just said, Yehudit, we really want these classes to be something that you have in your hand, something practical that you're going to use. Now, if we speak about 5 things today and you walk away with 1, I'm very happy. I'm not asking you to walk away with 5. If you walk away with 5, that's amazing. But if you walk away with 1, it's also amazing, because if there was a change, it validated the hour, and it's great you showed up and God wanted you to be here tonight. So we were talking about positivity in relationships. We were talking about sometimes more going into marriage as a relationship, because that's a very critical relationship in many of our lives. But everything we're saying applies to almost all relationships in our life. So like someone last week when she was sharing said this, she's using this all in terms of her relationship with her colleagues at work. Great. You know, as Yehudit was just saying, for people that just came on, talking about a tool we use and talking about helping her daughter with fears. Great. So in no way is this limited to a forum of marriage as a relationship, but I just tend to give those types of examples because for many people that is what we're talking about in a very common way. So we spoke last week and we reviewed it, we discussed it more in depth, some of these ideas, and some of these ideas we sort of glossed over, and I wanted to just focus a little more on that. So the first tip that we had discussed, and we've discussed this one many times because it so works. And I use it every single night, and I've used it for years. So if I'm ever going to tell anyone anything, I'm always going to say this. If you heard it from me countless times, which is the idea of a daily gratitude list. And I really like when it's written down. I know many people say they think it, they say it, that's great. But if you put it in paper, something in paper is more real. It's more solid, it more penetrated the physical world. It's going to have much more impact in changing your mindset. So, and you could show me by raising a virtual hand, who has been doing this? Maybe you did this before because you thought of this on your own, or because we've mentioned this many other times, or maybe you were inspired by this series, but who is trying at least verbally or mentally, but full brownie points for writing it down, to at least once a day, though I asked you twice, to come up with a gratitude list in terms of the relationship we're talking about. It could be your marriage, it could be your work, it could be with your mother, it could be with your neighbor, but whatever is that relationship you're trying to have positivity to, we've got Simcha, we've got Yehudit. And I got Shira, we've got me, of course, who's been doing this for years and is a humongous believer in this. All right, so we have at least the 4 of us that, yes, we are doing this. We are doing this to add, oh, we have Heidi. Awesome, we're up to 5. That's amazing. Oh, now I see, I can see it on the side. I don't even have to look and check my screen. We've got 5 people that are saying, I do this to create more positivity in my life. Now, from the 5, now you put your virtual hands down. Have any of you, I want you to put your hands down because I'm going to ask another question. Have any of you, over the course of these weeks, felt a need, and if you put it in writing, this only works if you put it in writing, which is a good plug to put it in writing, reread the list? Or if you were doing this before, at any point in time, when you wrote it, did you reread the list when you were feeling a little down about that relationship or about that issue in your life? Wow, that's good. Oh, and Dorit, I didn't even have her hand there before. That's good. That's why it's good to put it in writing, you see. What I want you to get, it's good to put it in writing, because even if you don't write it and you take a time, maybe some people do it right before they daven, or right when, or when they're taking their morning walk, or when they're on their treadmill, like you can put any time in your day when you say, this is a time I'm going to do this, and that's still very good. But to reread it, it has to be written. Then you have to otherwise just remember it. And if you're in a bad mood about this relationship, you're not going to remember it. But if you write it, you can always reread it. And it's really, it's invaluable. Because let's say for me, and I'm not doing it in terms of a sick relationship, I'm really doing it in terms of just my general life and God in my life. And when I'm feeling maybe down or under pressure of things going on in my life, and then I reread it and I'm like, oh my gosh, is God there for me in my life? He is so there. And all these things that I forgot about a little, that I let the negativity cloud over my clear perspective. And then it just all clears up. He is so there for me. So that is a great thing to reread when you're down. And therefore it's a great thing to write it, because then you'll be able to reread it. Someone want to add something to that? I heard a voice in the background. Okay. So that was one tip that we discussed, and I'm so happy to see so many people are using it and rereading.
Can I say something?
Sure.
Sorry.
Sure.
My kids recently had COVID. We just got out of quarantine, and it was the most positive experience I've ever had. And it's because of these tips, because every time it was a little bit difficult, I thought about everything I need to be thankful for and think positive about. And it really made the whole experience nice as opposed to terrible.
That is amazing. I don't wish anyone to have that challenge to be positive about, but I am so impressed. And maybe this whole course was for you. Maybe God just wanted to help you through. So he made sure we did it. And then everyone else is just sort of on the fringe benefiting also. But maybe this whole thing was for you. This was the hat and the wearer. I'm so glad to hear that, Yudit. Simcha, were you going to add something? I see your hand is raised.
No, that was from before.
That was from before. Okay. Happens a lot of times. People forget to put down their virtual hands all the time. Okay. But I really appreciate that, what Yehudi said. And there might be a lot of other people that said, no, it was for me. So really, it's great. It could have been for multiple people. And it could be one thing is for one person, one thing is for the other person. And that's why we sometimes have to listen to things that aren't relevant, because they're going to be relevant for someone else. But there's also something there for you. I always feel when you're in a class, just try to take one thing. Get more, wow, amazing. But something there must be relevant, because otherwise, why would God have you sit through a class? So you want to walk away with at least one thing that you could say, okay, this is why I had to come. And then everything else was also nice. All right. So we also discussed last week more at length, that we're not going to review, the idea of shifting our negative language, our negative thoughts. We spoke about identifying the negative language. We spoke about ways to replace it with something else, because we can't just say, I'm not going to say that. We got to have something we're going to say. And we did a lot of work on this last week. So I hope that helped people for this week. We spoke about enumerating positive qualities and, being very quick to try to have opportunities to share with people their positive qualities. We also did a lot of work on that last week. We spoke about looking at setbacks and seeing how setbacks could be springboards. And we also did work on that last week. And then something that we didn't really do a lot of work on, and I wanted to focus us a little more on this idea. I mentioned it before, so hopefully some people have done it, but we didn't do really thinking about it work, was enumerating the highest values of the relationship. Now, obviously, if it's a marriage, then it's the most natural thing to have values for. Or if it's your children or family, obviously for some things you might not have as many values. If it's work, it's your work ethics, what you're trying to accomplish.
Mrs. Turn, what about
Yes.
when it changes? Like through life, your values change sometimes,
That's
You
a
grow.
very good point. And that might cause friction in a relationship. And let's say, for example, in a marriage. If two people went into a marriage, you always want to go into a marriage with a commonality of values and goals. And let's say the two people went in and they were young and immature and young, and they did have common goals. They wanted to have a lot of fun together. They wanted to explore the world. They wanted to make a lot of money. They had very common goals. But then as they grew, sometimes they grow and they together reassess their values. Sometimes one does and one doesn't. And that can create a lot of friction in a marriage. And that's something that then there has to be a language of communication and a way of not letting this new goal or vision of marriage cause the marriage to crumble, but really to find a way to bridge. Maybe when we got married, neither of us was very focused on educating the children. We weren't thinking about children. I was 19, he was 22. We weren't thinking about our children. But now I've developed into a person that really wants to value the children and make them the center of our focus. But my husband never had that goal in the first place, and he hasn't acquired it. What do? We talk about it. We talk about the value, we talk about why it's important, and we see, can we create a bridge between the value I now have very strongly and the value he doesn't have. Or maybe conversely, when we got married, we both really knew that we wanted a very child-oriented family, and we wanted to really prioritize our children and make them know they were the most important thing. But then he got wrapped up in his career and he's so successful, and he dropped that to the garbage. He always said it was his value, but I know it's not his value anymore. So we have to talk about it. Can we recommit to that value together? So you are absolutely right, and that definitely happens many times in life. Either we abandon values we had, or we have new values we didn't have when we came in, or one of us does one thing and one of us does something else. And that can create a lot of friction in the marriage. And there's a lot of need to have very healthy communication to see, can we both join in this value, or can we not both join, but can one be on board enough to have the value happen? It's not my value. I'm not going to make it happen, but I'll go along your bandwagon. Can we at least do that? That's very, very important discussion you have to have with your spouse if that's what's happening. So we're looking at these idea of the values. And again, I'm saying the most obviously significant place is in a marriage. When you think of what were the morals, the ideals, the commitments that you had going into this marriage. And again, maybe you were young and never discussed any of it. It wasn't really clear in your brain. You weren't thinking along those lines. You were just really happy to have someone, and you're so excited. You never thought about like what life is really be like together and what do we want to prioritize. But at this point in your life, you probably, without consciously thinking of it, sort of know what's important to you as a family, in your marriage and as your family unit. So my point there in terms of the positivity was the idea of reflecting on those commitments, reflecting on the foundation of your marriage, and really understanding, really thinking through, what are those points? What are the foundational values of this relationship? And write them down to reread them and to really focus. This is the direction I want my marriage to go in. Now, question, again, maybe you didn't do this, but if you did do this, or if you didn't do this, but now you're thinking about it, would anyone like to share, just to help some of us think about it, such a commitment in her marriage and her family life? Something that's a moral or a value of your marriage, of your family. If nobody volunteers, I'm going to call on someone. That's the threat of the teacher, right?
Wait, can you repeat the question?
Sure. Maya saying, oh, I better not know the question. I would ask if anyone would share, we're first trying to see if we get volunteers, something that you would say is one of the values of your marriage or of your family. One of the commitments that you would say, yeah, that's something sacred that my marriage or my family life has as a goal, as a value.
So I think that what we do a lot and like what we've learned from each other is that we have, and also I heard it at like a Shabbos Kala, but basically like we always at the end of each day or like at least every week, like we check in with each other, like we make sure to like sit on the couch for 20 minutes and talk just for 20 minutes. Like that's it. Like
No
even
kids
if,
around.
like, yeah, no, we have like the talk, everybody's sleeping, whatever. And like we hit 20 minutes and we see like we're not done talking, like we still have to discuss some things, but we like that's our 20 minutes and like that's it. And then like we put it on the shelf and like we come back to it another day. And that way we like share with each other like what we did during the day or things we had to discuss. So that's good to check in, and also just be like at the end of each day or like when like to ask my husband like, okay, what can I do for you, or what can I do to help you? And like he always like checks in and be like, what can I do for you? Or like in the back of our minds, like we always say like, what have I done for my wife today? Not like take out the garbage, but like what really have I done for my wife today? And like I say to myself, like what have I really done for you today?
That's beautiful. That's a value. The value would be, the first thing I think you're really saying is the value of, it's very important to us that there's communication. That we never are too busy to stop communicating with each other.
Right.
That there's really a communication that's such a value that we're actually putting a time on it, and we're putting a, this time and we have a clock. So we're never too busy for it because it's only 20 minutes, but we want every day to make sure we communicate with each other. And I think the second thing you were saying, which I would view as a certain different value, but it's also a beautiful value to base a marriage off of, is a priority, a value, a goal of this marriage is to be there for my spouse. This marriage is built on people that are there for each other. And that's why we translate that into action by every night checking verbally and mentally, what have I done for you? What do you need me to do for you? Because I want to be there for you. That's what this marriage is about. So those are beautiful values. Thank you for sharing them.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Probably if someone says something so beautifully, like, oh, I don't want to talk now. But anyone else would like to share a value, something that they would say is a value? You only have to say one, a value in your marriage or a value in your family?
Well, I'm not married, but for me,
That's fine to have a value before you're married. It's great to have them before, then you know what you want.
Well, so with my kids, what we do, what I do every day, I try to make sure that after work, now that I'm working, that we sit down at the table and actually focus on each other and not try to get distracted by toys or games. And I put my phone away and I don't answer it for the first, like until after they go to sleep. I like make sure that
From when to when is your phone away? We want to be inspired. Tell me, from when to when is your phone away?
So when we get home, so I end work about 4, pick them up 4:15. I don't know, like from 5 to like 6:30.
From when they come home until they're sleeping, your phone is away.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful value.
And I try to focus because I used to have them all the time with me, and now I'm working full time. So I want to make sure that they know that they're important to me and that they're feeling my attention and love. And so that's
exactly what you're doing. So the value, which is a family value. Now, Firma said, well, I'm not married now. And I wasn't being facetious. I said, that's a great time to create your values. Because then when you get married, you're going to have clear communication with the other person about what your values are. And you'll see, does he also share those values or not? Is this a shidduch? So if only everyone thought of the values they care about before, though, as you said, things morph as you grow. But the value from a saying is that we want our family life and ultimately our marriage to be a place where children are prioritized and given the attention and love, not just like, catching the balls before they crash, but in a proactive way on a daily basis. And then she's showing her behavioral manifestation of this, that from when they come home until they're sleeping, her phone's away. And she only had an hour and a half. So some of us might have a lot longer time, but still just imagining.
I know
day,
my kids really do need sleep.
for the first hour when my children come home, my phone is away. Wow. I'm inspired. I don't know if I could do it, but that sounds like such an exciting, liberating thing. Just like I, at a certain point, turned off the notifications on my WhatsApp. I don't remember when I did this, quite a while ago. And I felt so liberated and strong and empowered that my phone was no longer beeping at me. And I recently, I should say this, I hope I'm saying this, maybe I'll make sure it doesn't happen. I recently deleted YouTube from my phone. I felt so empowered and strong that it was not on my phone. I'm not telling anyone to do it. I'm just sharing what gave me such a sense of freedom from that phone. So that's an amazing thing that Firma's doing. I love that value. So why did I want people to share values? Just because I thought that could sort of maybe translate it into reality and make everyone realize, oh yeah, I also have values. Oh yeah, and sometimes values, priorities, commitments, I don't know what you're talking about. But these are real people with real values, and we all have values. We all have things that we maybe thought out before we got married or maybe didn't. But we all came to what's really important to us that we want to see in a marriage and we want to see in our family. Now, once you identify your values, your goals, the next step is to ask yourself, is my marriage in alignment with my goals? So first you take the time to think. Again, I'm not saying 20, I'm saying 5. You want to make 5 3, fine. 3 to 5 important perspectives on what you want your marriage or your family life, because that's could sometimes, become the same point. What should be the foundations of it? And then you have to ask yourself, is my marriage in alignment with these goals? And if the answer is yes, then that's great. That's going to bring such positivity to the relationship. If you're talking about your marriage and you're feeling a little down about your marriage, and you reread that list that you wrote down, of course, of the goals and values this marriage is based on, and you say, wait, is my marriage in alignment with these goals? And you're like, it actually really is. That means my marriage is in a good space. Because what's foundationally important to me is happening. Okay, there's some details that I don't love. But the foundation of how I envision marriage to be, if it is, like we have those beautiful examples of communication, doing for the other, or whatever your values are, my marriage isn't aligned with my values. Wow. I'm going to relook at my marriage. My marriage is in a great space. Okay, there's a few kinks I have to work out, but my marriage is in a great space. If the answer is no, no, we always spoke about how this was supposed to be a child-oriented family, and honestly, it's not. I'm too busy. He's too busy. Neither of us, the kids are too busy. Okay, so now I need to realign. I need to work. I need to redirect my marriage to be focused on this goal. So the first answer, if it's yes, it's to bring positivity. But if it's no, it's to work to create that marriage, that relationship, that family that is in alignment with your goals. And then you'll have that enormous satisfaction of knowing your life in general is like your goals, which again, there might still be details that are not like you wish, but that's okay. If I know the real important pieces are in place, it puts in perspective the other pieces. So that was one tip that we discussed, and I want to do a little more work on. We also spoke about the idea of redeeming unresolved issues from the past in the marriage. And I mean, if it was a marriage, I'm saying marriage because I said that's the most common example I'm giving. It's true for all relationships. It's not only true for marriage. I'm going in that direction, but it's in any relationship. Redeeming could be a relationship with your mother, your father, your siblings. There could be a lot of unresolved past issues that are haunting the closets of your mind and your heart in all of those types of relationships. So to redeem the unresolved issues from your past in this relationship, and thinking of, you're different than you were then. If it's with a parent, maybe that was something that happened when you were 5 or you were 10 or you were 15. Well, you're 35 now. You're a different person. With a sibling, maybe it happened when you were 9 or 11. With your husband, maybe it happened when you're 20, now you're 40. So really thinking about, because a lot of times we don't want to think about them. We want to shove them in a closet and keep the door shut. But the problem is it takes a lot of mental energy to keep that door shut, and then the garbage oozes out, and then we have PTSD, and when something happened, it triggers us because of all that pain in that closet. So it's a really wonderful way to clean out the closet and therefore bring much more positivity to your life and to the relationship, to think about those experiences that were challenging, that were maybe painful, that are still unresolved. And imagine now talking to yourself, talking to your 5-year-old self that suffered from her siblings or her parents, talking to your 25-year-old self that got in a mess with her husband, talking to your 30-year-old self that wasn't the best mother for that daughter or that son. Thinking of those relationships and those unresolved painful issues, and imagine talking now to bring healing and understanding, because now you're older, now you're wiser, now you have tools you didn't have then. And sometimes you can really heal the past, you in that past situation, with the tools you have now. So I discussed this, previously, but we didn't really focus on it very much. I wanted to really just focus people on it for a few minutes because it's such a powerful tool that can really bring a lot of healing and a lot of positivity to relationships. So if people could think that this resonates with them, if it doesn't resonate with you, that's awesome. That means you have no unresolved issues and no pain from the past that's lingering in your heart. And that's amazing. But for everyone else, if you can identify within whatever relationship you're working on that you want to bring positivity to, some issue that's still lingering, some pain, some challenge that was never really resolved. You moved on, but you never really resolved it. So it's still there, still around. It's still creating garbage in the system. If you can think of one, raise your virtual hand. Okay, so we have some people that thought, and I'm sure if we have more time, more people will think, because a lot of us have in relationships unresolved issues, because a lot of times we don't resolve issues, we just keep moving, but they're still there and they're still painful. So with those issues, for those of you that came up with them, what I'd like you now to think is, do I have healing words now that I can tell myself that I didn't have then? Especially if it's an issue with a sibling or a parent. It could be an issue when you were young. Even in a marriage, your first year could have been really rocky. A lot of people's first year is really rocky. And you got past it, but there's some things that never got resolved from it. Or with you as a mother, sometimes the experimental child, the first child, now you're really good. Now you know how to do it. But you still have unresolved issues with that child because you didn't know how to handle the child properly. You didn't have the tools. It didn't work well between the two of you. It sometimes often happens with some child that you just feel, I don't click with that kid. Many people have children, they just don't click with that kid. They don't get that kid. They don't understand them. They're not in sync with their energy. Or it was just like their oldest, so they just in general didn't know yet how to handle their children. So for those of us that thought of something, can you challenge yourself to think, are there things I could say to myself now that I needed to know then? Because the beautiful thing of this concept is you can still say it to yourself. Even though it was a long time ago, you can sometimes like remove the garbage and the pain in your system by telling yourself now what you really needed to know then, but didn't know then. But now you do know. And just like working through it that way and giving yourself tools, giving yourself perspective, giving yourself healing, giving yourself positivity, you can actually resolve it. You say, we didn't resolve it. Where's the other person? Right now it's in your heart. Right now it's inside of you. So when you talk to yourself with ideas you understand now but didn't have then, you can actually heal those pieces. And that's an incredibly powerful thing we can do that really, really, really changes around the energy inside of ourselves and really removes that whole PTSD syndrome, which is then a tiny trigger I overreact to because there's a lot of pain inside of me that's really creating that overreaction. So again, if you can think of a relationship, in the relationship, an unresolved issue, and then if you can think of tools and concepts you know now, that if you knew it then, you would have handled things very differently. And it can really resolve the issue. Try to say it to yourself or write it down. Like, what would those words precisely be? What precisely do I need to tell myself to give myself a perspective I didn't have then? To give myself an understanding I didn't have then? To give myself an ability to let go that I didn't have then? And tell it to yourself. Write it down. Sometimes it helps doing other-handed writing. We could, if somebody would have a word, I would appreciate that. Does somebody have something they'd like to share that they would say now and they wish they knew then?
I have something.
Let me hear Mayan.
Just that what's really helped me in the past, like, and that you can only control what you can control. Like, don't try to control things that are just not in your capacity to control, because it really relieves a lot of weight off your shoulder. And when you realize that that's something that like only your child can control, you know, that he likes a non-collared shirt, but you want him to only wear a collared shirt, like that's not in your control. Like if he likes that kind of shirt, then that's what he's gonna wear, you know. Like you just need to love them and realize what you're capable to do for them, and not try to control them or the situation, and really just try to be in the situation with them. And that's really, really helped me a lot.
I was going to say, when you started talking, that this is the perfect words to say to a mother who's thinking back on their children, because that is what every mother needs to at some point learn. And there's many different variations on the theme Mayan said.
Right.
But
and it could be for husband too.
Yeah, that's true. But in essence, it's, and I tell myself this for many things, I don't run my life. I definitely don't run anyone else's life, because I don't even run my own life. God's the only one that runs the lives. God runs the world. He runs my world. He runs everyone else's world. So when I start thinking I'm in charge, it can put me in a very bad space. And when I realize I was never in charge, it removes a lot of that weight and that burden. And for mothers, a lot of guilt. So what Mayan said is an excellent, comforting word, especially for mothers thinking back to children they did wrong to. And you know, it's a very, very powerful concept that she just said, and it's very true. You just think back to yourself, and like what you really needed to know then was, I'm not running this child's life. I have no ability to run anyone else's life. I don't even run my own life. And then just feel the release of the pressure, the release of the unfair responsibility, because you can't do it. So it's not fair to demand it of yourself. And just like it creates a lot of healing inside. That was a perfect example. Perfect example. Anyone else have one they would like to share? That was such a good example. Does anyone else have one they'd like to share of like healing words that said now can really release pain from the past? So like I said, whenever someone says something really amazing, everyone's like, no, I can't say it. It's not gonna sound good enough. Don't feel that way. There's lots of different words that are very healing on many different levels. And I really appreciate that Mayan shared those, because it gave us like a perspective of, oh, that's what I'm talking about. Those are words that you could say now to yourself because you know it now, but you didn't know it 10 years ago or 5 years ago or last year. And so you got stuck. But when you say it now, it can get you unstuck. And you can even say things now that can get you unstuck from pains you had when you were 5. You really can, because when you were 5, you were a little child and you looked at things in a certain way, but now I'm an adult. Even telling yourself, I'm just saying, like that scared 5-year-old inside of you, I'm safe, I'm secure, nobody's hurting me, nobody's controlling me. Words, of course, you know, but you might not think to tell yourself, can really release a lot of traumas. Yehudit?
I wish I would have known, I guess, in the beginning, when I had kids, in the beginning of like when I had babies and all that, that certain things when they go through that I thought, okay, like this is just so hard and it's never going to end. I wish I knew that it was really just a stage.
Yes.
And things are just, they come in stages.
Yes. That is an absolutely very comforting words to remind yourself. You could say, well, what does she need to say that for herself? She knows that now. She does know that now, but she didn't know that when her kid was 5 or 10 or 15, I don't know how old your children are, and the stuff they were going through, but she knows it now. She does, but that piece of her never healed. I want to role play a little bit what you just said, because it's such a simple, perfect example. You were going crazy with your kid when they insisted every day on eating peanut butter and jelly, and that's all they would eat for breakfast, lunch, and supper every single day. And you were going crazy, and you're the worst mother in the world, and you didn't know how to handle it. And eventually they stopped. But that piece in you never healed, because you still felt you were the worst mother in the world, and it was horrible, and you felt like you were such a failure, and you wanted to like strangle the kid, but you knew you couldn't do that, but you didn't know what else to do really. Now they're 15, they're 25. But there is a piece in you that's still a pain in the relationship, because you still feel like, you know, to really like go to that space in that relationship with that child and really say now what you know, but you didn't know then. Every kid goes through stages. Kids can be impossible for many days in a row. They change, they get past it. I've seen that. And I was really fine then. I just should have relaxed and not taken on so much stress. That's my only guilt, that I suffered too much over it. Because if I hadn't suffered, the same thing would have happened. At the same point in his life, he would have stopped only eating peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. So the only guilt is how I suffered. And I just want to release that by knowing that it's a stage. It's a stage. And you could say, well, it works, but sometimes you have to tell it to yourself many, many, many times. Depending on how deep is the pain, that's how many times you have to tell it to yourself. But it really can just release it. And it's so valuable, because now there can be so much more lightness and joy and positivity in the relationship. I know for myself, what you did is saying, I say for myself to other people, that I have children of many ages. I mean, my oldest is like almost 33. Sorry, 32. Thinking that to him. And my youngest is 8. And with that span, it's much easier for me to mother my younger children, because I remember my older children going through these things and getting past it. So now when I look at my like teenage children, I'm like, I remember when their older siblings were teenagers. Thank God, we all survived the process. So when I look at these kids, I'm much more relaxed, because they'll just go on the same road, and they're teenagers, and teenagers are teenagers. But, I know they're going to grow out of it, because I know their siblings all did, one way or another. So it is a very strong comfort when you have the older children to look at the younger children, but we don't always have that gift of having older children and younger children. So it's nice to know that now and to work with it. So those were 2 really practical examples of exactly what I mean. And it really works. And it will so much release the pain in the relationship, and so much add to positivity and joy and comfort and pleasure in the relationship.
I also think that sometimes, like, if you're hurt by somebody, let's say, you can also just, because like, even if like, let's say you're hurt by somebody, you have to like understand that they're not capable of giving you what you need, you know? Just sometimes reminding yourself that you can't expect things, you know? So to understand that they're not capable will kind of take the hurt off.
It does
of
take the hurt
you.
off. And that's another
Like,
great
just
example of how
understanding.
you could now release a hurt that happened then. You know, you know, a lot of times also, that's actually a very, very good message for children that suffered with their parents. And it's a very healing message for anybody that was the relationship they were thinking of, is, you know, how I phrase that thought is, they were doing the best they could with the tools they had. They didn't have very good tools. I mean, again, that works for most parents. Obviously doesn't work for every parent out there, but for most parents, they love you. They wanted the best for you. They just didn't have very good tools to correctly nurture you and understand you and be there for you and give you what you needed. They were well-meaning. They didn't have very good tools. So sometimes when you think back, I'm saying those types of relationships, and just tell yourself many, many, many times, if it's a very deep hurt, she or he or they were doing the best they could with the tools they had. They didn't have very good tools. They were a product of their parents, you know, generationally a product of their parents. This is encoded in our DNA. They were doing the best they could with the tools they had. And that like really releases. What Fromm was saying, if you apply that to a marriage, which is also a very healing statement with a marriage, is, you know, I was really asking for something the other person wasn't capable of giving. Not blaming yourself. That could sound like a self-blaming message. I don't mean in a self-blaming way at all, but more like releasing the pain. My expectations weren't in sync with the abilities of the other person. What I needed wasn't in sync with the abilities of the other person. My needs were valid, but it wasn't in sync with his abilities. And that's why it didn't happen. And when you just, again, say that to yourself many times, it's not a one-shot deal. If it was deep pain, if it's a deep enough pain that you remember it, it's a deep enough pain that you have to say it many times. But eventually it really trickles inside and then it releases. Why bother? Well, if you're still in the relationship, there's a great need to bother. And even if you're not still in the relationship, there's still a need to bother, because every pain we have inside that we didn't resolve, we walk around with all day long. And it really drains us. So it's very worth the bother. Anyone else want to share on that one? Anyone else? These are all really, really insightful thoughts.
I was actually thinking exactly like what you said about that, like just but also like the relationship, like, oh, he's just not capable, like he never, you know, a husband, or, you know, like they just didn't have the right tools when, as they grew up, and now like in the marriage, you know, like they just don't know what to do in that situation. So like it did take a while, but it is very also like a weight off your shoulder, like, okay, whatever, like not doesn't mean to like hurt on purpose, like they just don't know how, it's just not capable. So definitely, yeah, that definitely really helps.
It does. It releases a lot of pain and a lot of self-blame, because I must have been at fault, you know, like goes back and forth. And it's like, there's no fault here. I had a need. It's a valid need. He didn't have the tools. He didn't have the abilities. And then like, okay, and then it's like, there's no blame on either side. It just releases it. Now, if you're still in that relationship now and he still doesn't have the tools, then you might think about, well, how would I give him these tools? Because I still have this need and it is still a need. Or you might say, at this point, it's not a need in my life anymore. You know, when I was younger, I wanted my husband to be my best friend. And now I realize that, thank God, I don't need him as my best friend. And maybe he wouldn't be a very good best friend, but he's an amazing husband. So my needs shifted when I found other ways to fill that part of me. And I don't need that from him. But looking back, instead of being disappointed at him, I'm like, he didn't have that ability. I wanted deep, meaningful conversations. He's a man. He didn't know how to give it to me. Guess what? He doesn't have those abilities. And I had those needs and I still have those needs. And now in a very healthy way, those needs are filled by other people, by my women friends. And I can still have a very good relationship with my husband because I'm not putting on him something that he has no clue how to give. So yes, that's very just releasing. Okay. Other ideas we spoke about was the silver linings that we've experienced in our marriage. Meaning, what I meant by that, when I said it, but I just make sure that it was really clear. What I meant by silver linings, of course, there's many different versions of the term silver lining, the good in the bad. But what I really meant as I tried to explain the concept is what I call the redeemers. That sometimes we've gone through experiences that felt so difficult, so challenging. We were so overwhelmed. We were so drained. We were so depleted. We felt so weak, helpless, hopeless. We've gone through hard stuff. We've all gone through hard stuff. Hopefully none of us are going through it now. We've all gone through hard stuff. And then you know what? Hey, I actually survived to talk about it. And I smile and I'm a wonderful person and I have a great life. And if I think back, there were silver linings. There were redeemers. There were people that helped get me through it. There were experiences that helped get me through it. There were events that helped get me through it. Could have been a book I read, a video I saw, an inspirational comment, a song, a teacher, a lesson. There were things that were little silver linings in my darkness, little things that were little hooks that helped me grow past the situation, survive the situation, succeed in the situation. And it's sometimes really good to think about that. Why is it a good idea? Why are we doing this? We're talking about adding positivity in relationships. And the main goal in this, just to be like completely transparent of the idea here, is that when we think about the past, it really gives us perspective on the future. So hopefully none of us are in that situation now, but somebody might be in the future. And when you've really thought through it and seen how God put into place those little silver linings, that line you needed to hear, that story you needed to hear, that friend that needed to be there for you, that teacher that needed to talk to you, that role model for how to stay above and not below, you have trust in your life and in the challenges you're going to experience. And you know that there'll always be those redeemers in your situation. Again, it could be people, it could be a concept, it could be a WhatsApp video. There'll be something that's going to give you the ability to rise past the situation and to survive, to talk about it, and sometimes to laugh about it, or sometimes it's painful, you can't laugh about it, but you survived and you're okay today. And even a better person because of it. So if anybody can think about a situation in a relationship, because that's what we're talking about here, adding positivity to relationships, and then maybe now can identify an event, a person, an experience, something that helped them get through that maybe they never even thought about before. But that really there was some message, some pivotal role that somebody had that they might never know they played a pivotal role. But that really helped you get through. They really said, somebody says to you what you need to hear. They're not your best friend. They're not your rabbi. They're not maybe the wisest person in the world, but they said exactly what you needed to hear. God worked it out. That was a redeemer. That was someone that really helped you have perspective and keep moving in the relationship, in the situation. Survive it, succeed, overcome it. So if anyone can think of such a situation in their life when there were really people or things that happened that really helped them get through a hard time you went through, and thank God you're past it. And this person or this idea or this teaching really helped. If anyone can think of something like that in their life, just raise a virtual hand. So there's a lot of virtual hands raised, and probably more people sometimes need more time to process and remember and think. So what I want you to sort of ask yourself, and you can put down your hands and then raise them to see if this is just sort of like getting there. So everyone could put down their hands now. Actually, how to put that down. When you were going through that situation, did you realize then what a pivotal role they doesn't necessarily mean a person. I've given you lots of ideas what they could mean, but they were playing. Did you realize then that person or that teaching, that saying, that line, that concept, did you realize then how much it was helping you? How it was really your anchor of support that was helping you get through that friendship?
sometimes I think it depends on age and circumstance.
So isn't it interesting how some people said absolutely yes, some said absolutely not. Some people said then. Yes, that's my point. That's exactly my point. What Dorit is writing is she said absolutely not. Then she didn't see it at all. Now she sees it. Now she can look back and have a perspective. And then she didn't at all see it. She didn't at all see it was helping. She wasn't at all conscious of it. She wasn't all aware of it. Now she's reflecting. I asked that question for exactly that reason. For exactly Dorit's response. Thank you. Because that's how a lot of us are. That's how life is a lot of times. Sometimes when you're going through something hard and you have a really good friend who's there and she's your sounding board and she's, you know, somebody's there for you in your life. So it's a little easier to recognize. And sometimes, you know, like God sends us little pieces of silver lining, and we're clinging to them, but we don't even realize they're helping. Then afterwards, we're like, how did I survive that? And you look back and you actually identify things that were in place the whole time. And you were even using them, but you weren't even aware of it. It's a beautiful thing to take this a step further and first reflect on, well, when did I start realizing how that person was so pivotal? How that concept really held. I can think of a certain time I was doing something very difficult in my life, and there was a certain concept. There was a certain phrase I kept thinking. Now that was very conscious and very focused. I was completely aware of it. I was holding on to that phrase. And that phrase kept me through a very, very difficult time. So sometimes, I mean, that was very focused on my part. I thought of a concept and I needed that concept, and I rethought that concept many times a day for a long time until, thank God, things eased up. So sometimes it's conscious on your part, seeking and finding and holding on to something. Sometimes a person just comes into your world that's there for you and picks up so many of the pieces. And sometimes it's people or concepts, or I'm saying a video, a phrase, a teaching, a lesson that sort of is there. You're not even realizing how much it's helping you. But then later could be a year later, could be 5 years later, could be 2 months later. You look back and you reflect and you're like, oh, wow, that really pulled me through. It's a really nice thing now, if you're thinking about this, to write a letter to the person, to the teacher, to the book, to the teaching, to the practice, to the event, to anything that helped you survive and grow from that place of fear and pain and brokenness. If it's a person, you might choose to send a letter. You could keep it though for yourself. And you're not sending a letter to a book, but unless it's to the author of the book. But you could keep it for yourself just as a reminder. And this is the reason why I'm speaking about this concept. The reminder of the hidden redeemers in your life, that we really do have redeemers in place. And that's why this is within this framework of positivity. Yes, that's a beautiful example, the line that Mayan just posted. So you take that line when you're going through a hard time and you said it many, 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 many times. Maybe you don't even remember where you saw it or who posted it or where you heard it. It doesn't make a difference. You took ownership of it. It became yours and it helped you get through. So imagine just like breathing, realizing, and writing a letter to that saying or to whoever coined that saying that you have no clue who they are. Thank you. You know, it's funny. This is not really relevant. I mean, this is very parenthetical, but today I was thinking about something that happened in my life. I mean, that a fence got put up to help me deal with my son who has tremendous elopement issues. And I was thinking, you know, obviously God was the one that made sure this fence got put up, but there was a person, now that I'm thinking about it, who put something in place that really, with many, many steps and many, many miracles later, made it happen. And I never went back and thanked her. Someone in one of these government offices, whatever, long story. And today I was just like, I want to tell her thank you. I mean, I haven't spoken to her for years, but so what? I still had her number at work. I called her number. She no longer works there. I even have her home number. Don't ask. It's very unusual to have the home number of one of these people. But for some reason, one, she called me from home and then I wrote down the number and I saved it. Do that for people that you might need in your life in these types of situations. So I wouldn't usually have called her, but I wanted to call her, thank her. So I called, the home number's disconnected. So then I called back the work number. Did they have any forwarding? Of course, they had nothing. But I felt I tried because I was like, you know what? I'm just thinking she really helped me. I mean, God helped me. And there were many, many, many pieces that need to happen, but she played a pivotal role, which I only really was thinking about now and didn't 100% get then. I got it, but not completely. To really appreciate that was in the physical realm, a very pivotal role. And I wanted to say thank you. So I know I tried my best to say thank you. Again, we don't run our worlds. The rest is in God's hands, but I tried. So it's a really beautiful thing to be able to say thank you to a person who helped you a long time ago. And maybe don't even realize they helped you, but they said something that stuck in your brain and helped you. They said something that helped you. It's really nice to just reach out and say, you know, when you said that comment, you don't, they don't remember what they're talking about. Of course, that's totally fine. I just want you to know it really helped me. I don't remember saying it. I do. Thank you. Beautiful moment. And it's very important. Why? So you have that positivity for the future. So, you know, the same way God did in the past, he's doing it in the future. In any other situations we're in any other challenging moments, there are always going to be those redeemers. People, a line, a song, a word, a teaching, a friend that are going to be there to help us through. Wow, it's 9:13. Okay, we are going to shift gears and speak for 2 minutes about the Parsha, because you're supposed to, beyond anything else, have a nice Dvar Torah to impress your children with. Okay, so I have many ideas. I'm only going to obviously share one. I knew I would only be able to share one. And I'll try to encapsulate this, but it's 9:14 now. If anyone has to go, feel totally free. If anyone wants to make sure they have a nice Dvar Torah, stay on. This week's Parsha is Parsha's Chayei Sarah. Chayei Sarah, of course, begins, as we know, with the life. Chayei Sarah means the life of Sarah, though actually the Parsha starts with her passing, which is an interesting thought that we're not going to go into. And of course, this very famous concept that I'm sure you all learned at some point in your life, that the Torah says, when she passed away at 127, it says she was 100 years and 20 years and 7 years. And Rashi says, why does it say 120 and 7? Don't waste words. Say 127. To teach us that she was like a 100-year-old, she was as pure as a 20-year-old. And a 20-year-old in certain areas of law can't really be punished until they're 20. So she was as pure as a 20-year-old, and in a sense, as pure as a 7-year-old. Meaning in the heavenly courts, you're not responsible till you're 20. And even at 20, she was as beautiful as a 7-year-old child, meaning a 7-year-old is, now we know she was very beautiful. She was 89 when she was seized by Abimelech. Never mind, she was seized by Paro before. She was 89 years old when Abimelech took her. So obviously their 89 might not be our 89, but it's not 15. She was 89. She was one of the most beautiful women that ever lived. But still, she retained that complexion when she was 20 of the beautiful, pure complexion of a 7-year-old. Now it's interesting because we could say, okay, you know, for the Torah to say she was so holy that when she was 100, she was as sin-free as 20, and we understand that's a very important value, of course. But to say, and she was as beautiful as when she was 7, like, I mean, this is what we're saying, the praise of Sarah, like Sarah Imenu, that she was an amazingly beautiful woman. I mean, she was, we know she was. The fact that she was taken at that age shows us she was twice. 2 different horrible people seized her for her beauty. We know that, but that's her praise. That's what we're talking about. So it's really an important concept to understand that the physical world reflects the spiritual. Her spiritual perfection was mirrored in her appearance. The physical is really a reflection of what's going on as a spiritual reality. Meaning a tzaddik, someone who's perfect in the spiritual domain, should be perfect in the physical domain. There's actually a story with the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe that he was once with the Lubavitcher Rebbe. They were walking and they passed by an archery place. Not something we would probably came. And we might pass by a gaming station. They passed by an archery place. And the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Rebbe got stopped and he started playing, so to speak. He started shooting the arrows. And every single arrow he shot went bullseye, one after another, which of course is even more difficult, into the bullseye of the target. And when the Rebbe says the story, you know, the Rebbe says that obviously the Rebbe Rayatz wasn't like, you know, privately a few hours a day practicing archery. So how did he do it? I mean, did God just make a miracle for no reason? Like, that's a really random miracle. Who cares if he hit it properly or not? It says, no, it wasn't a miracle. And no, he wasn't practicing archery to be able to do that. But he was a tzaddik. If you're a tzaddik and you have absolute spiritual perfection, it's going to reflect in absolute physical perfection, even in these areas, meaning like, who cares? It's not a question of who cares. It's a reflection of a spiritual reality. So then, if we would see a flaw in the tzaddik, for example, if the tzaddik doesn't have children, he's very poor, something that's a flaw in their physical life, then we say, wait a minute, this tzaddik is perfect. I mean, he's a tzaddik. We all accept him as a tzaddik. We don't think he has some secret sin somewhere. So what's going on? The physical mirrors the spiritual. The spiritual we know is perfect. How do we not see this in the physical reality? And the general answer then is that the tzaddik is carrying the burden for us, not reflecting any flaw of his because he doesn't have any. So what's creating this? That he's carrying our burden. So we don't get punished and he's willing to suffer for us. I recently in this class, recently means sometime in the last 3 months, I think I remember sharing the story of a tzaddik who was very ugly, and he said that he chose this so his kala shouldn't have this. I said that in this class. True? Do we remember that story? Did I say? I thought I said in this class.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay,
You
good.
did.
Good. Okay, fine. I didn't want to say the story again, but it just so perfectly illustrates the point of like, wait, I see an imperfection that's tzaddik. True. He voluntarily took on exactly that imperfection to save someone else that pain. A woman who would care much more, actually his future wife. So that's the tzaddik volunteering to carry the burdens that the Jewish people shouldn't carry. Now, of course, that's in a tzaddik. But actually, and this is something we could think about, that sometimes even on a personal level, we might feel that we're going through something which might be not only for us, but for others as well in our life. Again, we're not saying we're there for Klal Yisrael, but maybe in our world, in our family, in the dynamics of our relationships, that sometimes we can feel that we're carrying things because we have the shoulders to carry it. We have the ability to carry it. So Hashem is graciously allowing us to carry that burden, not just for ourselves, but sometimes even more for other people in our world. So this does also trickle down on the very human level to even people like us sometimes. But in general, we should know that everything we see is always, always a reflection of something so much higher. So someone just asked a question, which I'll respond to on a chat. So again, for those people that have to go, feel absolutely free. So the question was that we think of ourselves as in this world to overcome the challenges with evil, which is what we do like every second of our existence. Knowingly or unknowingly, we're always being challenged. But a tzaddik isn't. A tzaddik is perfectly godly. He's not battling evil, totally past it. So then what's the point of his existence? What's he in this world for? So that's a very interesting question that was just asked, I guess, piggybacking off this Dvar Torah for your Shabbos table. So there's a few answers. First of all, we have to understand that most tzaddikim, I will not say all, it's not true for all. Some tzaddikim are born tzaddikim, meaning they're born perfectly godly. That's very rare. Most tzaddikim are born with the potential to be a tzaddik, and then they have to work to overcome evil the same way we would have to work to overcome evil. They just overcome it completely to the degree that they actually eradicate it from their system. Like King David said, David HaMelech said, he said this in Tehillim in Psalms, absolute truth. V'libi halal b'kirbi. He said, my heart is void inside of me. My heart is missing something that the rest of us have in our hearts, called the Yetzer Hara, an evil inclination. His heart was empty. He got rid of it. He wasn't born without it. He worked very hard to get rid of it. Okay, but at this point, fine. So King David, full points. He worked really hard. He got rid of what we struggle with. But now what's he doing in this world? So now what he's doing in this world is the service of the tzaddik, the service of the absolutely perfect person, which in general is not, try to say it's a very deep question and there's a lot of answers. I'm trying to give a true answer, so I'm trying to think how to explain it the best way. We deal with evil, we battle evil, we overcome evil. The tzaddik doesn't deal with evil, he doesn't battle evil, he doesn't overcome evil. What's the tzaddik's arena? He's dealing with godliness. So just as we currently battle evil, there'll be a time called Mashiach when none of us are battling evil, because there's not going to be any evil in the world. When Mashiach comes, God said, Ruach HaTumah a'avir min ha'aretz. The spirit of impurity, I means God, will remove from the world. So there won't be any evil in the world. So what are we going to be doing? Like, the whole world becomes a nursing home, a retirement home. Like, we're all done. We finished, yay. And now we just sit and bask in godliness. I mean, it sounds boring after a while. What are we accomplishing? We all need to accomplish. What's the accomplishment? There's no evil to overcome. It's actually interesting. Lubavitcher once brought this out in the 60s when the first man landed on the moon. And he spoke there very interestingly about the concept of space travel versus an airplane. An airplane moves against the force of gravity. The friction with gravity is what propels an airplane forward. But in space, there's no gravity. So a rocket ship is not having any friction with gravity to propel it forward. So how does a rocket ship move? It moves from its own mass. So the Rebbe used this as a metaphor for exactly this concept. The friction with gravity is like us in the trenches, battling evil, overcoming evil, battling more evil, overcoming more evil. And we move by that battle, by that growth over evil. Mashiach, there's no evil. There's no more friction. There's no more gravity. So what are we going to do? We're going to be like the rocket ship. We're going to move from our own goodness to propel us higher and higher and coming close to God. So that's the general answer for the tzaddik, which we can understand in terms of ourselves, as we will all be tzaddikim then, that we're going to move forward. Not, I'm struggling not to be jealous. I'm struggling not to get angry. I'm struggling not to lose my temper, or I'm struggling not to be impatient. But God, I want more of you in my life. How do I get more and more and more? Not because of bad, but in terms of good. How do I get more and more and more? How do I get closer and closer to you? In technical Kabbalistic language, what this is called is that our current service, which is currently the service of all people besides the tzaddik, levarer birurim. That's a Kabbalistic concept, which means to extract the shards of high energy that are entrapped in the evil of this world. And every time we battle with evil and overcome evil, we're actually releasing this energy of God that's trapped in the evil cosmically and is released through my work. The tzaddik doesn't do that work. He doesn't deal with evil. So what's he doing? What are we going to do by Mashiach? We're going to do a different service, which Kabbalah calls liyached yichudin, which means to fuse godliness together. That maybe this is a spiritual source behind Humpty Dumpty. I sometimes wonder that God, in the process of creation, in a sense, severed two essence pieces of self, which are called HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Shechina, or in the language of Kabbalah, Kutchabrichu and Shechinte, and our service is to put them back together. And every time we serve God, and the more deeply we serve God, the more powerfully, we're actually fusing these energies of God back together. If anyone here is Sephardic, Sephardim traditionally actually would say this at various points throughout the day as they did certain commandments. They say a phrase, L'shem yichud kutchabrichu shchinte. Many Sephardic customs are based on Kabbalah. And that's the idea, the fusion of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Shechina. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the higher level of God, Shechina, the lower level of God, and my service puts the pieces together. In Chabad, we say it once a day, towards the beginning of our prayers. And the idea is this is a statement of purpose for the entire day. When we fuse pieces together, it's sort of like in a marriage. The marriage, as I was just speaking about the physical mirroring the spiritual, we mirror God. So we have a husband, a wife, we come together, and in that moment of intimacy, a child can be formed. The masculine dimension of God will be the HaKadosh Baruch Hu. the feminine dimension is the Shekhinah. When my service puts the two pieces of together, it's like that moment of intimacy and a child comes out. What's that child? That child is a new energy of God that was never existent before, that my work has now enabled to happen. And because I'm connected to that energy comes down most specifically to help me. So that is what the tzaddik is doing now. He's not battling evil. He's fusing godliness and allowing new godliness to emerge. And that new godliness comes down to this world. And again, most specifically, is geared toward that tzaddik that formed it. But of course, in general, the whole world benefits. And each one of us do that in a much smaller way by our own good deeds, mitzvot, Torah, whatever we do that's serving God. And by Mashiach, we'll all be doing it in a very, very, very full way as more and more God is emerging because of our service. So that was a little bit of a deep answer, but that was a very good question. So I wanted to give a real answer for it. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you for having the patience for so many of you that stayed on for the extra extension of the class. And I really
you
hope
so
that
much.
we all will use these tips. I'm going to really try what Firma said and to just put away that phone. That is like unbelievable. And have a better week because of it, and help other people also, like you had started off. She shared it with her child. That's beautiful. Find someone to share this with.